Welcome to 41 Performance, where on this episode, we're going to be rebuilding this engine for our 1968 Camaro restoration project. First things first, let's get the rest of this engine disassembled. Now with the timing cover off, we have access to the timing chain and gears. I'm going to go ahead and take off the timing chain and gears right now. Just like that, they come right off. Now by threading just one bolt into the cam, I can remove it a lot easier. And just like that, we have the camshaft out of the car. The next thing we're going to do is flip the engine over. You just pull the pin in the back of the stand. That allows it to move freely. Alright, now the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is take off the oil pump. Now as you can see, we have much better access to the next part we're going to be taking out, which is the pistons. Alright, let's go ahead and take the first one out. After a little bit of struggling, I was able to get the rod cap to come off. Very carefully grab the bearing, put it back with the rod cap, and we can go ahead and take the piston out. You can just take something soft like the plastic end of the screwdriver and you can go ahead and lightly tap it. And when you do that, you want to make sure it's something soft so that you're not damaging any of the components. Definitely easier with two people, so you could have someone down here getting ready to catch it. Alright, I grabbed the rubber end of a hammer. It's a little longer, so I should be able to stick it in there a little better and push. Alright, there we go, and the piston comes out. As you can see here, here's our piston. I'm going to go ahead and clean all these up so they're nice looking. And I've got new rings coming so that we can put some new rings on there. Alright, now one thing that I've learned that is just really good practice is as soon as you get the rod out, you want to put the corresponding cap back on the rod. And then after you get the cap back on, you want to go ahead and put the rod cap nuts on too to protect the threads. Alright, now this is the bearing out of that engine. As you can see, there is some wear right there in the middle. That seems like pretty normal wear to me. There's a little bit of grooves going on in there. It's not down to copper yet, so it seems like this would be a fine bearing to run for the most part, except for these grooves that are in there. However, since I'm doing a full rebuild, I think I'm going to go ahead and replace the bearings anyway. Alright, now let's go ahead and take the rest of the rods out. Alright, and that is the final piston out of the engine. You can see they've all also had all this carbon buildup on them. Otherwise, they don't look too bad. The skirts don't have much wear on them. They look pretty good still. And yeah, you can see the same thing on this bearing down here. A lot of wear, minor grooves. With this being our last piston, again, I'm going to throw in this reminder to always put your rod caps back on your rod, and then as well as put the little nuts back on the studs just to protect those threads. Since I don't have any of the new piston rings yet, I can't put the pistons back in the block. But what I can do is I can put the new cam in the engine as well as the cam gear and timing chain. Alright, when you're installing a new camshaft, you definitely want to make sure you put plenty of lube on this. Now this camshaft came with some lube that it recommends using, so I'm going to go ahead and use this. However, for the rest of the engine, I have another brand assembly lube that I went and bought at the parts store. Because when you're assembling an engine, you want to use assembly lube to make sure that when you start the engine up, it is not starved of lubrication at all. Because the worst thing you could do for a new motor would be to run it dry. It doesn't have to be a ton, but you want every surface to be covered. Alright, now we can go ahead and install the cam. While doing this, you want to make sure that this end goes in the back, and then the end with the peg goes towards the front, and that's what locks the timing chain gear into the cam. You just want to go slowly when you're doing this. Be sure not to force it. Sadly, I've lost the rest of the footage of me putting in the cam the rest of the way. At this point in the video, I'm attaching the timing chain and gear. Right, now I'm bringing you in close here to show you those timing marks I talked about. Here's the timing mark for the cam gear, and this is the crank gear. Here's the timing mark for that. It's marked by a little circle. You want to make sure they're aligned, tooth tip to tooth tip, and that means the engine is in time. When you're tightening these, you want to tighten them to 18 to 20 foot-pounds is the torque spec for these 3 bolts. I have mine set to 19, right slap dab in the middle. However, the engine may turn, so you're going to have to find a way to stop the crank. Probably could just hold it since it's such a small torque. There you go. There's that one torqued. That one torqued. Alright, and that's all 3 of them torqued to spec. It's been a few days since we last checked in. Let me show you what I did off camera. For starters, I prepped the cylinder heads for the head gaskets. I also made sure to give the inside of the block a decent clean. And finally, I gave all of the pistons a good cleaning, so they're ready to be installed inside of the engine. Speaking of which, let's get to it. The first part of that process starts with our brand new piston rings. Alright, now what I just did there in that time lapse was I installed the oil rings. There's 3 of them. There's a bottom oil ring, which you can see there, it's flat. The middle oil ring, which is this wiggly one, and then the top one, which is another flat one. Those are the ones that are touching the oil and scraping the oil off the cylinder as it's going up and down. The next ring I'm going to be installing is this ring right here. This is the second compression ring. And as you can see, it's marked right there, top. So the ring goes this way, just like this, on the engine, not like this. You don't want to install it like that because that's the wrong way. It goes like this. And the reason this is one directional with the marked top is because this side is flat, whereas this side, as you can see, has a chamfer on the inside. Alright, now I'll show you me installing one of these rings. Now again, you want to make sure that top mark is facing up towards the top of the piston. Then I'm going to go ahead and just spin it into place right like that. And then I'm just taking this one and I'm just kind of helping it over. You want to do this evenly because these will snap. You want to make sure you're taking your time, and there you go, you can see it goes right there, and it should go right into place just like that. And now it's that simple. There you go. That's your piston ring put in place. I should mention that they do make piston ring pliers, which just go like this. You can squeeze on and off. However, I don't have those, and this is a just fine way of doing it as long as you're careful. I finished installing the second compression ring. Now this is going to be the first compression ring and also the last ring we're installing on the piston. Now this ring does not have an identifying mark of which way it's supposed to face. That means it can be installed both this way and or this way. It does not matter the direction of which side is facing up. Now we're just going to install it on the piston just like we did the second compression ring. We're now done with installing the piston rings, and the next thing we have to do is install our new bearings. Now when you're installing bearings, you want to measure the clearance between the bearing and the crank when you install it and torque it down properly. Because if that tolerance is too tight, you're going to ruin your engine to tell you it's short. I'm not going to tell you how to measure properly that because there's multiple ways to do it, and I do mine a certain way. However, there are many videos on YouTube that I would recommend you go and search on how to measure the distance between your bearings properly. Now I will mention, when handling these bearings, you want to be very careful, as there's a thin coating that goes on the inside of the bearing that can be scratched just with your fingernail. Now that seems counterintuitive. Why would you want a soft bearing? Wouldn't it just fall apart? Well, yes, that's why the whole bearing's not made out of it. The very thin, soft layer on here is meant to catch tiny debris and particles and encase them inside the bearing, preventing further damage, instead of it getting in there and just tearing all your journaling surfaces up. When installing your bearings into your rod or your rod cap, you want to take a lint-free rag and you want to make sure that the surface where the bearing sits is completely clean and free of debris, as well as the mating surfaces around the studs on your rod and on your rod cap. That way, when you torque it down, nothing's off-centered and there's nothing stopping it from being torqued down all of the way. You then want to align this groove right here with the groove in your bearing and install it. As you can see, that's an installed bearing. And I was very careful not to press down from the middle. You don't want to do that because, again, that'll ruin that coating that's on there. And boom, just like that, after following those same steps on your rod cap and all the other following rods and caps, you're ready to install your pistons into the engine. Now there's a few notes I want to make before you install the piston. You want to make sure that this journal surface where the piston's going to go is completely clean. Grab a lint-free towel and some brake clean, wipe it off. Make sure there's no debris on there. Next thing you want to do is assembly lube. You want to make sure that you put plenty of this stuff on there. You also want to put it on the bottom side of the bearing. That way when you install this from the bottom side, it's not dry. You want to make sure this thing is completely lubricated. You do not want to install a dry part in your engine. You will ruin your entire engine. I cannot stress that enough. Now I'm using this style of clamp ring compressor. There's also other types of ring compressors you can use. However, this is the one that I had available to me, and that's what I'm going to be using to install the piston. Now when you're installing the piston, you just want to gently tap on it. I'm using this hammer right here, but not the metal end. No, I'm using the rubber end, and I'm just lightly going like this. You do not want to force it in. You'll end up breaking things. Just lightly tap on it, and it'll slide through the compressor into the block. Once the piston is in the block, you can use your hand to guide it. If need be, you can continue to use this while using your other hand to guide it to make sure you do not want to hit the crankshaft with the end of the rod. You want to gently and slowly guide it into place, making sure that these aren't going to strike into the crankshaft. Very slowly. You do not want to be in a rush. Just like that. Gonna line it a little bit. And boom. That's it. It's installed. Now you gotta go grab your rod cap. Make sure you put assembly lube on your rod cap. Doesn't have to be a whole bunch, because I already have some on here, but that just is making sure that it'll be okay. Then you're gonna install your rod cap, making sure you put it in the right direction. It'll fall right into place, just like that. Now after you have it pressed down, snug onto there, you're gonna grab your 2 bolts. You're gonna put them on, thread them in, just like that. And then you're gonna wanna torque these to spec. Slowly, going evenly, making sure you're not twisting the rod cap. Just make sure it goes nice and even, and you won't have any issues. Now we're gonna grab our torque wrench, and the torque spec for these is 45 foot-pounds. There you go. Same here. There you go. That is a torqued rod cap. And you want to make sure it spins freely. Which it does. That is a very good thing. Alright, now with the next one prepped, we can go ahead and install it into the engine. And there you go. With that change of sound, that means that is now sitting flat. We can go ahead and install our rod cap, just like that. And that's both of them. That is our second rod installed into the engine. Now we're going to move on to the next bank of rods. Do that by turning the engine, which it does very smoothly, which is a very good sign for the health of this engine and the proof that we're putting it together correctly. Now, of course, I could have done something completely wrong that I won't even find out until we fire the engine up, or maybe not even until 200 miles later after the engine's been running for a long time. However, right now I feel very confident in my work and what I'm doing. I have gone to school to do this, so I feel qualified enough and very confident that this is going to work. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these off camera, and if anything happens, I'll bring you guys up to speed, and if not, I'll see you guys after all this is done. Now that we're done installing the pistons and rods, it's time to work on the top end of the engine. Now that the engine's flipped over, to prepare to put the heads on and put the head bolts in, we need to clean out all of the head bolt threads. And to do that, you can use a tap, or in my case, I'm just using an old bolt that I cut some grooves into with an angle grinder, and that'll work just as well. And to do this, you just want to go and thread it in all of the way, and then thread it back out. And now you can see all of that orange rust gunk that was sitting in there are now getting out of there, so we can properly torque these down. Alright, now let's go ahead and do this side. About ready to put the head on. And this is our brand new head gasket. I'm gonna go ahead and place that right on there. And just like that, sits on there nicely, making sure all of our bolt holes line up, and they do. So this is the right head gasket, and it's staying on because we have these two little pegs in the bottom here that just keep the head gasket on and help align the head properly. All right, here's the new cylinder head. There we go. All right, and the new cylinder head is now on. You can go ahead and install the bolts, torque them down. Okay, I have all the bolts in the engine. You have 2 medium length bolts on either end, 7 longer length bolts in the middle, and then 8 shorter length bolts on the bottom. I'm going to torque the head bolts to spec in the proper pattern, which I'll show you on screen right now. And I'm going to go in increments all the way up to the final torque to make sure that the head is seating evenly so that I'm not warping it. I'm going to go in increments of 25, 45, and then the final torque of 65 foot-pounds. All right, that is cylinder head number 1 on the engine, fully torqued down. And we're ready to put on the other cylinder head, and let's get set up for that. We've got our other head gasket here. We're gonna go ahead and set this on the engine. We have our other head, and we're gonna go ahead and line up the dowels and place the head on. Go ahead, put the bolts in and torque everything down. With our head bolts threaded in, I'm gonna go ahead and start torquing them down. That is all of the head bolts torqued down. Both of the heads are on. And now it's time to move on to the next thing. Our next project is going to be these right here. These are screw-in rocker studs that came with these heads. And they go and screw in right there. Then we're going to go ahead and torque them down to 50 foot-pounds. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and install all of our lifters into the holes. It's pretty easy. You just want to make sure that you've soaked your lifters in engine oil prior to installing them. And then you just go ahead, align it, and drop it right in, and it'll fit right in the hole. You also want to make sure you have the correct end facing down. This end faces up towards the head, and this flat end faces down towards the cam. Now that all of the lifters are installed, we're going to install the push rods as well as the rocker arms. All right, these are our brand new 7.8 inch push rods that we're going to be using. And they just go ahead and slide right in the holes, and then you put the end on the lifter. This is a stock small block Chevy rocker arm, and it goes just like that with the push rod fitting in this end, and this end presses down on the valve. However, before I install it, I want to make sure everything is properly lubricated. I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of assembly lube, and then I'm going to go ahead and put it right back on. And then we have our special nuts, and I'm going to actually go ahead and put a little bit of assembly lube right there on that, install it, and then tighten and torque it down. Now I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of the other rocker arms. To properly adjust valve lash when using a hydraulic lifter, you want to tighten down your rocker arm nut until you have 0 lash between your push rod and the rocker arm. Then, once that's achieved, you want to go exactly 1/2 turn. And that is it. That's all you have to do to properly adjust your valve lash. Now we can go ahead and continue to do that on all of the other rocker arms. I do want to add that when you're adjusting valve lash, to start you want to have the number 1 piston on top dead center compression. Then you can adjust the valves number 1 cylinder, number 3 cylinder, number 4 cylinder, and number 8 cylinder exhausts. And then you can also adjust number 1 cylinder, 2, 5, and 7 intake valves. Once you do that, you can go ahead and turn the engine a full 360 degrees and then adjust the rest of the valves. We've just got a few more details and then the engine will be ready to run. The engine is almost ready to run. And if you want to see that, be sure to subscribe. That's it for this video, and I'll see you next time.